Caucuses, primaries, Super Tuesday. These are the things we talked about a month ago. Super Tuesday hadn't even happened yet. Now, pandemic, social distancing, ventilators, and of course the coronavirus or COVID-19 dominate our vocabulary. The mood has certainly changed. Hospitals running out of space to treat patients. Images of tents to treat people at hospitals across the country in places like New York. The astounding rapid spread in New Orleans, some now attribute to the large crowds at Mardi Gras. There aren't enough ventilators and intensive care units to go around for what's still expected to be a staggering increase in seriously ill patients from the coronavirus. We all see the numbers of cases and the dead climb by the day. All this put tremendous pressure on the president and the Congress. Two relief packages enacted earlier this month now pale in comparison to this week's unprecedented stimulus package now adopted. A largely economic response to record unemployment claims filed by more than 3.2 million Americans last week. A stimulus package worth $2.2 trillion. Here's just a snapshot of what the stimulus does and does not do. You've heard about the direct cash to American adults. $1,200 to individuals, $2,400 to married couples, $500 for every child in a family. All of that gradually phases out for income above $75,000 for individuals and $150,000 for couples. A huge boost for unemployment benefits of an extra $600 a week for 4 months on top of state benefits. $500 billion in loans and grants for big and small businesses, airlines among them. $100 billion for hospitals, protection against foreclosures and evictions. There is no money, though, for businesses tied to federally elected officials. That means nothing for the president's resort properties, no money for the border wall, the oil industry, cruise lines, the cannabis industry, for example. There's already an expectation that Congress will have to do more the longer the pandemic continues. One way this crisis has affected us here at For the Record is that we no longer have conversations here in the studio. We are doing our best now to rely on technology like Skype. On Thursday, I spoke with Illinois Congresswoman Sherry Bustos right before she headed back to Washington, D.C. to vote on the stimulus. Here's the first part of that conversation. What are the things you like in the stimulus bill coming from the Senate?
Well, I think it's worth noting that while this is coming from the Senate, the House played a major role in getting this to a place where we can vote on it tomorrow. In fact, as soon as I'm done talking with you, Jim, I'm flying back out to Washington, and we'll vote on this hopefully tomorrow morning. And if it has to go an extra day, it will. But we are now having to take all of the precautions that are associated with this pandemic from a health perspective, with making sure that we're getting the country's work done. So that said, the major components that we have been fighting for as House Democrats are this. We want to make sure that families and workers can come out of this in an okay place. And I don't just mean from a health perspective, that's important, but from an economic perspective as well. So starting within a week to 2 weeks to 3 weeks, those who filed income taxes and have direct deposit, their return direct deposited, they should start getting their checks to the tune of $1,200 per person if you make $70,000 or under. That would go up to $2,400 per family if they make $150,000 or under. And there are some prorated amounts that go up to an individual income level of $99,000.
Sure.
That is really important to help families get through. On top of that, any child will be given a $500 check that will go to the family, of course. So that's very important just in this very short term. And if you look at where the government has made mistakes in these past crises, it was, if you look at the 2008 terrible economic downturn, that Wall Street was very well taken care of, but Main Street wasn't. Well, we're not going to make that mistake this time around. So we've got substantial small business, not just loans, low interest loans and zero interest loans, but actual grants to help them through this crisis and be able to keep people on their payrolls. I think those are the most important elements as it pertains to the economics of our families.
We've heard members of both parties say it's not the perfect stimulus for them. You know, what are the things that you don't like that are the toughest things for you to swallow?
Well, I think part of it is, we're in an area where we live in this congressional district. We have 90,000 labor households, and we have so many people who rely on their pensions. And if you think about where those pension investments are, they've taken a huge hit just over the last week and 2 and 3 weeks. So we want to make sure that there are fallbacks for labor pensions. So we fought for that, and as you mentioned, there are always compromises. The other side of the aisle didn't want that, so that's a fight that we'll have in this next phase. Also, there are OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration guidelines to make sure as we go through that our workers are safe. We didn't win that battle either. But again, to have these direct payments to make sure that we are helping small businesses. On top of that, one of the biggest concerns that we've heard here in our congressional district is to make sure that that personal protective equipment is out to everybody who's on the front lines of this healthcare pandemic. And there are some huge problems that our nation is facing. We put plenty of funding in there. The problem now is that can we ramp up, can manufacturing ramp up fast enough to meet this growing demand that we have from a health perspective?
Congresswoman, we just saw record unemployment claims filed from the last week. How do you respond to Republican critics who think the unemployment provisions are too generous and provide an incentive for Americans not to work?
Well, I think we're all driven. If you're a member of Congress, whether you're in the House or the Senate, or for that matter, if you're in the White House, we're all driven by our values. And I would say what unites House Democrats in Washington, D.C. Is that we are going to do everything we can to, number one, help kids, number two, help families, and number three, to help people who are just working hard to try to get by. I think it's unconscionable to say that this shouldn't be our top priority. It has to be. And to have $3.3 million unemployment claims within the last week, we as a nation have never seen it to this level. In fact, this is 6 times the level of what we saw in a single week back in the Great Recession. So we've got to be there for people. We want people to be able to come out on the other side of this when this pandemic is all said and done and not have their incomes totally destroyed. So we have amped up the unemployment insurance to the tune of $600 per week for those filing for unemployment. So in other words, if you file for unemployment insurance, we will add money on top of that to make sure that you are made whole, because people are going to have to pay their bills. They've got to get their groceries. They've got to take care of their kids. And to me, again, if you look at it from a values perspective, that is our number one priority.
Part of my conversation with Sherry Bustos. Still ahead, pressuring the president, what the Congresswoman and her fellow Democrats still want to see from the Commander-in-Chief. For the record.